Hi, everyone. We're so pleased to have you join us today for AI and the Future of FedEx, an exclusive conversation with Frederick W. Smith, founder and executive chairman of FedEx. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Wendy Maldonado, and I'm Yale College class of 1993. I'm the executive director of Accelerate Yale and Yale Angels, and I'm so excited to co-host today's session, which is co-sponsored with the Yale Veterans Association. Accelerate Yale is a global community of diverse alumni and friends of Yale engaged in innovation, tech, and entrepreneurship. Our mission is to cultivate an active, inclusive ecosystem that thoughtfully promotes meaningful connections and collaborations, while also serving as a bridge between alumni and current Yale students. We encourage all of our webinar participants to drop their names and contact info into the chat so we can see who is here. And I might need to just adjust that setting, so bear with me, okay? Please note that we are recording today's session and all participants will be muted. Today's session will last 1 hour and we'll reserve the final 20 minutes for your questions. If you have a question that you would like to submit for Mr. Smith, please do so using the Q&A bubble at the bottom bar of the screen. And due to the limited time that we have today, we will be asking that you limit your questions to the business of FedEx and to not ask any personal questions of Mr. Smith at this time. And now I would like to introduce our moderator and our guest speaker. First, our moderator. Sam Hendel is Yale College class of 2003. He is the co-founder of Accelerate Yale and Yale Angels, but there's more. He is also co-founder of DataMiner and the founder of an exciting new business called Jukebox, which is doing fractional ownership of music rights. And now it's my honor to introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Frederick W. Smith. On April 17th, 2023, FedEx celebrated a milestone. It has been 50 years since the first fully operational night as a company. From the very beginning, its founder and executive chairman, Frederick W. Smith, had a vision to create an integrated global network that few could imagine. He's a courageous innovator who launched, evolved, nurtured, and built FedEx during those 50 years. He created a global delivery network out of the belief that connections could make the world faster and more efficient. And he knew that both physical and data systems needed to be in place long before the coming world of e-commerce. Under his leadership, FedEx has become a $90 billion plus global enterprise that serves more than 220 countries and territories. FedEx has been recognized many times as one of the best companies to work for and is consistently named among the world's most admired brands. During his career, he has been instrumental in securing significant regulatory reform for the aviation and trucking industries. Fred also continues to shape critical policy issues for his industry, including advocating for a more sustainable future by investing in carbon capture research, electric vehicles, and other innovative solutions for the transportation industry. Please join me in welcoming FedEx founder and executive chairman, Frederick W. Smith. Over to you, Sam.
Wendy, thank you so much. And Fred, thank you so much for being here. We're so thrilled to have you. And it's very meaningful for the Yale alumni who are listening, the Yale students who are listening, and for our overall community. As Wendy alluded, I want to start with the founding of the company, and we're not going to spend too much time on it because I think there's a lot of things that that you and FedEx are doing now in today's sort of modern with today's modern technology that's critical and something that I think we're very excited to have you share with our group. But if you could go through just some of the basics of the founding story, and we'll take it from there.
All right. Well, thanks very much for the kind introduction, Wendy. The Cliff Notes version of the founding of FedEx are directly traceable back to my days as an undergraduate in New Haven. And I could fly in those days. I had a pilot's license about the same time I had a driver's license. And I used to fly charter flights out of Tweed New Haven Airport. And I would notice that from time to time, I would be hired by the high-tech companies around New England, which was the epicenter of technology in those days. It migrated, of course, as we all know, mostly to the West Coast. But I'd get an assignment to fly a small box for Xerox in northern New York, or IBM, or Burroughs, or Sperry, or any of the names that were legendary in those days, to take a part down to Pittsburgh to keep a bank running whose computer was down. And so the automation of society became something I was very interested in. I wrote a paper about it. I don't remember what the grade was, although I sort of in a moment of being a smart A, answered a reporter's question saying, I guess I got my usual gentlemanly C on it, and that sort of stuck. I don't remember the professor, but let me add that a C would have been a good grade for me. So that was okay, that it's part of the lore. I then went in the service. People these days don't understand quite what it was like. When my class 66 came out, everybody either went in the service or you had to have a deferment of some sort. My guess is class of 66, well over half of us went into the military. A lot of them into the Navy. I was in the Marine Corps because its officer training program allowed me to do my OCS during the summer. And I went in June of 66 when I graduated and served 4 years, and then came back out when all the trends that I'd seen about the automation of society were even more true. Hospitals were putting diagnostic machines in. The computers were replacing virtually all of the clerks in banks. The airplanes were becoming flying computers and so forth. So I looked at a way to solve the logistics problem of high technology and automation, which is incumbent on both the user and the manufacturer, because if your computer goes down and you've replaced all of the clerks in San Angelo, Texas with an IBM 360 computer, your whole enterprise is down. So logistics up to that point, particularly military logistics, were supply push. You cut the trees down, you made them into 2x4s, you took them out to the lumber yard, the contractors bought them and put them in a house or whatever they were building. In the high-tech world and an automated world, it's demand pull, because you can predict with great accuracy when any computer or any airplane or when any diagnostic machine needs a particular part. You just can't tell which of those installed machines needs it. So the solution was, which I thought not very innovative, but a lot of other people thought it was some sort of a breakthrough thinking. It was a hub and spokes operation, a central clearinghouse where all points are connected to all other, and the mathematical formula is n times n minus 1. So you have this incredible ability to connect all points that are otherwise not connected on an equivalent basis during the same time frame. It had been used in India, it had been used in France, it was used in bank clearinghouses. The Federal Reserve used a somewhat archaic version, which we kept trying to tell them if they would use the system that we designed would reduce the bank float, which was a big problem in those days. But that's where the name Federal Express came from. American Express was already taken, so I used Federal Express. We had 1, 2, 3 separate marketing studies that showed of this enormous need for the service. The problem about putting FedEx in place is a network does not exist until the network exists. In other words, it's front loaded. But once you get to minimum viable size, it's hard to displace that network. And so even though we had up to 8 additional competitors that came into the business and tried to knock us off, including most importantly UPS, which was 8 times bigger, we outgrew them. And we kept innovating, probably most importantly by going into the international business, because all of these technology companies that I described engaged in an enormous manufacturing diaspora, particularly in Asia and the 4 Asian tigers. So we expanded internationally, came up against regulatory barriers, famously bought sort of a legendary flying tramp steamer company and turned it into a door-to-door express network, the Flying Tiger line. Then as UPS and we competed, we became more and more like them and vice versa. And we finally went into the ground parcel business in 2000 by purchasing a company called RPS. And so now the industry that we are in is essentially three major companies. There are all kinds of people on the peripheries. There's us, there's UPS, and there's a company called DHL, which is partially owned by the German government, came into the US market, was not successful, and then withdrew. And then you've got the Postal Service and Amazon sort of doing things down here, which most people think they're doing something they're not. But the three main competitors are UPS, FedEx, and DHL. So we're today, as Wendy said, well over $90 billion in revenue. We operate 650 planes. We move right before the recent turn down about 16 million shipments a day. We move packages and pallets. We have the largest less than truckload network freight company in the United States. We have in our total system almost 700,000 people around the world. A lot of those are, branded affiliates and so forth, but in the core company, about 550,000, 5,000 locations, and about 210,000 vehicles. So that gives you the Cliff Notes version of April 73 to today as to what FedEx is out there doing. We're keeping the world operating, I can tell you that, and we're particularly proud of the role we played during the pandemic, where we and UPS, because we're the only two networks that have the capability to do it, delivered almost all of the COVID vaccines.
Fantastic. And Fred, you had two sort of very formative experiences before you started the company in 73. You had obviously your Yale experience and then your experience in the military. Mm-hmm. I would love if you can go into sort of some of the things that you took from Yale that helped you both found the company, but also make the company successful. Yep. And then also do the same with your experience in the military.
Well, I sort of sum it up, Sam, by saying Yale taught me how to think and the Marine Corps taught me how to do. And I was liberal arts major at Yale. I always loved history and the classics. I studied mostly political science and economics. But to this day, I go down rabbit holes every day. I can't resist an article in Foreign Policy or, some magazine. So I try to stay focused on my core competencies. But I think the education I got at Yale, as I mentioned before, taught me how to think about things in a somewhat broader perspective than if I'd been an engineer or a scientist. I probably wasn't capable of doing either anyway, but I have a big debt of gratitude to Yale because I had great professors, had a lot of good friends there, but I think the education I got there was very helpful in letting me see things, putting things together, like seeing those parts and synthesizing that into the broader demand of the automation of society, which, by the way, is still very topical because about half of all the things that are moved in the international air markets are semiconductor based. And now the whole reshoring of semiconductor manufacturing in the United States and the disputes with China and so forth, the AI, which is dependent on these incredible processing capabilities and so forth. The Marine Corps, I went in and the Vietnam War had become very hot the year before when President Johnson sent the Marines ashore. And I went into the Marine Corps. I wanted to be a leader of men, and they accommodated me. I was an infantry platoon leader and a company commander. And then it's a long story, but I recycled and went back as a forward air controller and an aerial observer my second time. And I think the leadership lessons and sort of managerial processes that the military taught me were very, very important in my setting up FedEx. For one thing, because of my experience, it was not incongruous to me at all to have air and ground units together in the same enterprise. prior to my doing that, that was like some sort of synthetic line that you never crossed. You didn't have the pickup and delivery and the trucks in the same unit as the aviation. To me, it was very, very normal. But I'm particularly grateful for the Marine Corps teaching me a lot about leadership. The principles of leadership have been known for thousands of years. They're just hard to do. And they're particularly hard to do in very stressful environments like the military. So I'm very grateful to the Marine Corps as well, and have said that and written a few articles saying that it was very integral to the success of FedEx. We use a lot of things that the military does that a lot of businesses don't. One of the things that the service taught me is you are lavish with your praise, and you always praise in public and you criticize or coach in private. So to this day, if you come inside FedEx, you'll see that our management school is called the Leadership Institute, because you've got to withdraw that discretionary effort in the service industries. Maybe you don't have to do that in manufacturing or in other professions, but in the service business you do. And I think the other thing it taught me very importantly was the growing importance of technology in the management of large organizations. And we were a very early adopter of technology, inventing, for instance, the ability to track and trace packages. That's done today by the billions, and it completely revolutionized logistics, because inventory and warehouses are just things you put in a place so you know you got them. So when we invented the ability to track and trace and migrated that information into our customers' offices and PCs we gave them, and then thank goodness the internet was invented by, to some degree, my old partner Jim Barksdale, at least the browser was, we were able to migrate that information to all of our customers. And so now you saw inventory, whether it was at rest or in motion, whether it was in a warehouse or a 50-mile-an-hour FedEx truck or a 500-mile-an-hour plane. And now sort of it's all come to the ultimate conclusion, because our institutional memory, our whole life is automated in our phone in our pocket. And you can track and trace or buy the goods of the world as an order entry device on this phone. So the whole theme of FedEx and its raison d'etre of an automated society, and then using technology to operate a very fast cycle and sophisticated logistics in that automated society, is a straight track from the day the company started.
No, it's amazing, and we'll go on. Later on in the webinar, we'll go through some questions on kind of what FedEx is doing now. But it's incredible that you guys really have always led with technology, and the business was started with the needs of the technology business, and just kept growing from there. But I want to go back, and we have an amazing audience, and thank you everyone for putting things in the chat. We have a lot of entrepreneurs and founders that are listening. We always do at Accelerate Yale, and I'd love to ask you about that 0 to 1. And really, what gave you the confidence to become an entrepreneur and start FedEx rather than follow the more traditional path?
Well, part of it was my experience in Vietnam. I mean, to put it politely, that was a hard way to make a living. And in retrospect, it was a national mistake of the highest order. But once getting in it, the war was incompetently run and cost the lives of a lot of people, including a lot of my friends. So I was sort of angry about it when I got back, and I was determined to do something constructive. I guess I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. I didn't think traditionally, maybe not in a good way in certain respects. So I decided to do it. But from my military experience, and I'll pass this along to the entrepreneurs and the aspirant entrepreneurs, in my mind, to be an entrepreneur, to start something, the secret, just as it is in the military, or for that matter, athletics or most things, is the preparation. And you have to be very clear-eyed and objective about the analysis of the market need and the demand for the service. And then you have to make sure that you have a defensible, sustainable position, which, other than being, Elvis Presley with talent, or LeBron James, or having the Waldorf Astoria and having a piece of real estate, you've got to be very careful that you're not going to start a company, prove the demand, and then have bigger, better heeled competitors just wipe you out. So you've got to be objective about both of those things. Am I correct about the market? And is my ability to execute and defend it over a period of time? And I think a lot of people don't do one or the other of those, and it ends up not well. So that's why I did it. I wanted to do something constructive. I was very sure of the market analysis. As I mentioned early on, I had not one, not two, but three separate marketing analyses. None of the three knew the other one was doing it. So it was three independent sources, just like you want two or three sources of intelligence in any matter. And so that proved to be true. And the only thing that created problems for us, which I have had an abiding interest in from that date forward, was the Arab oil embargo in 1973, which sort of thwarted our initial startup and delayed our profitability by about 18 months. Otherwise, the projections of the revenues were absolutely on track, and it introduced me in a not very pleasant way to Washington because we didn't have any fuel allocations, which were based on your previous history. So I had to really do some hard work convincing the folks that had control of those fuel allocations that we deserve some. We got them. A man named John Sawhill saw what we were trying to do, was very helpful. But there's always going to be things that happen. And so you have to have ability to handle adversity and things that come at you. But the preparation and the defensible execution are the two main things which are forgotten. The other thing I'll mention, and I want to make sure the audience knows this, the world as it existed in 1973 for venture is not the same world at all. In those days, established institutions couldn't even invest in a company like FedEx because you were bound by what was called the prudent man rule. And I talked to my friend John Doerr recently on the West Coast. I personally testified in Washington for the National Venture Capital Association, which led to the relaxation of the prudent man rule that allowed fiduciaries to put some of their clients' money into venture capital. It became, I don't want to say respectable, it became a portfolio. Yale was famous for it, going into forestry, venture capital, and so forth. And preserving capital gains for investments, which of course was very important. So our experience raising the money, which mostly came from small business investment companies, which were part of the SBA and from regulated banks, is far different today, where there's a whole venture capital business with thousands of potential participants. So it's a great time to be an entrepreneur, maybe better a couple of years ago, but it's cyclical. Interest rates will go down and it'll go back and be on the entrepreneur side. But be sure to prepare your market analysis and make sure you have a plan that you can execute and then defend against the inevitable copycats, because if anything is proven to be true in market systems, it's all markets are in the process of commoditization at best and at worst extinction. So you have to have a defensible business as well as just a good idea.
That's great. That's great advice. And one thing that in our discussions before this that I always go back to, you've been at the helm of FedEx for over 5 decades now as founder and CEO, and now as executive chairman. And that's a very rare thing. And I would love if you could go into sort of how, the going from the founder to the CEO. What were some of the factors, especially as you move from the startup phase, the scaling, the mature phase of the business? What were some of the challenges as the business became more complex? How did you make that adaptation from founder to CEO and running the business?
Well, I said a moment ago that Yale taught me to think and the Marine Corps taught me to do. Well, in the service, you don't call Heydrich and Struggles and Spencer Stewart and say, hey, I need a general or an admiral and find me one out here in industry and hire them. It's all promotion from within. So I'd been in an institution where it wasn't unthinkable that you would go from second lieutenant all the way to commandant of the Marine Corps, even more for those who are veterans, sergeant major, which is one level above commandant. That's a joke for you folks that hadn't been in the military. That's the highest enlisted rank. The NCOs run the service, particularly the Marine Corps, so it's a compliment to the NCOs. So that was not anything that intimidated me that, oh my goodness, once I become a major, once the company becomes 100 million, I won't know how to do this. The way you do it in the military is you train for it. And most importantly, you have to be objective about your situation and your personnel. That's what gets most people in the civilian world. They want to make things in their mind, things that are not, they gild the lily, they kid themselves. Well, if you do that in the military, it's fatal. So you have a very strong discipline to be objective. And in the case of evaluation of people, if you put the wrong person in charge, it too can be fatal. So you have to be very clear-eyed about the capabilities of your folks. I mean, quite frankly, I've never talked about this too much. I changed out 5 or 6 very important people inside FedEx. And with one exception, I never did it so the outside world knew it at all. I let them keep their dignity and, go on and do whatever they did. And many of them had capabilities in other areas that I certainly did not have. But I don't think that my experience going from startup founder to running the company as the CEO. And I'd say the third thing, which is probably more important than anything, I never, I like to think that I never had an ego. I always realized that it took a team to run something like FedEx. Certainly took a team to operate in the military. I could go for hours about that. And so we always dealt with it as a team. And my business partners, one of whom is now the president and CEO, Raj Subramanian, is one of the most brilliant guys I've ever seen. He has skills that I do not have, particularly in digital literacy, and he's very sophisticated. He's an Indian American guy that went to the best school in India, then got an engineering degree at Syracuse, and then went to the University of Texas. So in my objective analysis, I mean, I would put Raj in charge of things and I would never think about doing. And some of my other partners, like our CIO and our general counsel, I never kidded myself that I knew more law than our general counsel, or I knew more technology than the great CIOs we had. We had a string of some of the best in the world. And our current one, Rob Carter, I mean, when Fortune magazine evaluates people, he's always first string CIO, and hell, I think best I ever was like third string. So you have to be objective, of being a third string CEO, but you surround yourself with top of the thing, and then you operate as a team. Somebody has to make a decision. I will bet you in all the years that I served as CEO of FedEx, I never had to overrule a decision that was arrived at collegially and collaboratively, but maybe one time, and that was an exigency, where some regulatory issue was involved. So I think those are the key elements: is objectivity, careful analysis of the skill sets. Keep your ego in check and stay humble, and deal with the enterprise on a team basis, a collegial basis. And I also did one other thing, and that is I tried to study the great captains of industry, the great captains of the military over the years: George Marshall, Admiral Nimitz, Tom Watson. I could keep going, and I tried to adapt my personal capabilities to the lessons and the mistakes that they had made, and that was very important to me too. So you got to have time to take a step back and look at little things on an historical perspective. The world did not start with your birth, and if you hadn't had a lot of experience with mortality, a lot of people think that's the case, and it's particularly dangerous with a lot of people today because their experience in the world is through a screen. And they think it's what's coming to them in the string. They have very little practical experience, particularly dealing with blue-collar people who don't think the way most of the folks that come out of Yale think. I I can promise you that, and all you have to do is to watch our fractious politics to see that that's the case as well.
No, that's a, you know, and that's actually a great transition to the modern times, and really, you know, FedEx has always stayed ahead of the curve on innovation, and that's through sweeping regulatory changes, societal changes, technology changes. And I'd love to focus on a few topics on modern day FedEx. The first one, and Fred, we spoke about this, you know, at length in our pre-call, but cybersecurity. And I would love to hear, you know, really, you know, what FedEx has done in that area, and how you've adapted to a very challenging, you know, landscape right now.
Well, let me go back to what I said again about team orientation and not having too big of an ego. So I served on 5 other New York Stock Exchange boards and 2 major medical nonprofits. And on 2 of those, I chaired the audit committee back in the 80s and the 90s. And what was beginning to happen is all the time in our audit committee was being spent talking about the technology that underpinned our bookkeeping. And during the 90s, you had a lot of these bespoke enterprise software systems, and people would put in hundreds of millions of dollars. They wouldn't work. You'd have these big write-offs. Thank goodness for the development of servers and standardized things that led to the cloud, because it took a lot of that complexity out of the equation in business. But what I realized that we really weren't talking about how to keep the arithmetic of the business. We were just talking about technology, and most of the people on the audit committee didn't know what they were talking about. So I set up an independent committee. There are 3 that are required under the SEC and New York Stock Exchange. There's audit committee, there's compensation committee, and there's nominating and governance committee. So I established an information and technology oversight committee. And we recruited at the board level the best technologists we could find: Judith Estrin, Jim Barksdale, Ron Ponder, more recently, General Chris Inglis. And that ITOC would oversee our CIO, and he would advise the board, and particularly me, on where we're on the right track, were we evolving in the right way. And we had 3 major technology inflections, from ACP PARS, which was the original airline control program, the reservation system, to IMS FastPath in the 1990s, and then over the last couple of decades, moving to you know, what we now call the cloud computing, putting things remote. So these transitions would have been very uncomfortable for me as a liberal arts major, but not with the advice and counsel of outstanding people at the board level that could help us, you know, in our technology head, not to make mistakes and not to take undue risk. Now, what happened over time is the risk changed, and it went from systems risk, more or less, to cybersecurity risk. And we went on a big search, and we got General Chris Inglis, who was the number 2 at the National Security Agency, to become a FedEx board member. He took on the ITOC. We changed the name of it to the CITOC, Cyber and Technology Oversight Committee. We established a fabulous information security department headed by Gene Sun, who's our CISO under our Chief Information Officer, Rob Carter. And don't forget, if you look up the history of FedEx, we actually lived through the biggest cyber attack in business history. We had just bought a European company called TNT, and we were not big in Europe, and our 2 largest competitors, UPS and DHL, were. So we made an acquisition of some size to our company. And not long after we had bought it, in June of 2017, Vladimir Putin fired a cyber weapon, not Petya, they called it, at the Ukrainian digital payment system. It brought down the National Health Service of the UK. It brought to its knees Maersk, the biggest container shipping company. It cost $1 billion, as I recall, to Merck, the wonderful pharmaceutical and medical company in New Jersey, and on and on. So the IT infrastructure of TNT in the space of 2 minutes went from a vibrant business system to bricks. 4,000 servers and 40,000 PCs became useless. So had we not had these platoons of IT professionals that went over and we remediated it, cost us a large amount of money and all kinds of problems with our customers, as you might imagine. So anybody who is not taking cybersecurity at the highest possible level, including the risk of cyber ransom and malevolent software, you might not like it. It may be like watching paint dry, but if you don't pay attention to it, it's the biggest risk, I think, in business, other than some catastrophic terrorism event or natural disaster.
And I like to focus on one more area of technology that's very very much on people's mind right now, which is AI, and the development of machine learning models and algorithms that are likely to affect all of us in our day to day and also in business. Would love to hear your views and what FedEx is doing and what's the company's approach to looking at these new technologies.
Well, we have a group which we set up a couple of 3 years ago. I mentioned that Raj Subramanian, our now CEO, then our COO, set it up, called DataWorks. And its whole focus is to make FedEx go in and be the leader in the next stage of digital technologies, which includes artificial intelligence and digital twins and all of the things that people are now talking about, quite commonplace. But Raj in particular saw this years ago when we established this unit. It's a bit different than a traditional IT, which is infrastructure and managing the business. And this is using information to see things and do things that were incomprehensible prior to the development of these types of systems. I'm not as scared of AI. Maybe it's my age, or maybe it's my predilection to be a bit more risk-taking. I don't know. But I think it's like all technologies. There are 11,000 nuclear warheads between Russia and China, and we've got 6,500 of them. But somehow we've managed to not blow ourselves up. Let's hope that continues. So AI is a tool. It can do things if left to unintended. Will there be bad actors that try to use it, and all kinds of things that will happen in the political realm and so forth? I'm not sure it could be much worse than what happened to us in the social media space, where outrage became a business model. So I think it will let you do things that are quite extraordinary. One of the areas that's very difficult for FedEx, even though by far we are this huge enterprise moving all of these high-tech and high-value-added things, exactly as we were doing early in '73, except here we are in 2023, all around the world. Well, one of the most difficult things is go through the customs of 220 countries around the world. What AI is going to let you do for the first time is to take out a lot of the friction of moving across borders, because you can ask questions and articulate things that you didn't even know to ask before. And that's just one example. In the security area, I think you'll see patterns, you'll see discernible trends. I think this will be true in marketing too. For better or worse, you'll be able to see things well in advance of what you would have seen normally. So I'm more optimistic. I think in the military area, it could be quite serious if good people don't get ahead of the game and recognize how powerful it can be. But we're very heavily into AI and digital technologies that are absolutely on the leading edge through our FedEx DataWorks unit.
Great. And I have two more questions, then I'm going to turn it over to Wendy and for some Q&A. But I would love to sort of pivot back to Yale here and talk about carbon capture and FedEx's landmark donation to the Yale Center for Natural Carbon Capture. Fred, do you mind walking through and telling the audience a little about what the company and you were doing there?
Sure. Well, We have been very focused on carbon emissions for a long time. I began in the early part of this century to focus on this issue as the co-chairman of the Energy Security Leadership Council with 8 generals and admirals whose careers have been basically protecting the oil trades, and 8 CEOs who used a lot of fossil fuels. Herb Kelleher of Southwest, Mike Eskew of UPS in those days, many others. And we attempted to develop an energy policy for the United States, which didn't have one. Remember, I said I've been focused on this since '73 in the Arab oil embargo. And we recommended to the Bush 43 administration, we maximize oil and gas production in the Western Hemisphere to reduce dependence from oil and gas coming from countries who were enemies of the United States. 2, to use less of it, and we got the Bush administration to reinstitute fuel efficiency standards, which was quite a trick, considering that the president and the vice president were both oil men. And 3rd was to develop alternatives. And from that came what is now called the Electrification Coalition, and a lot of the work that was funded at Advanced Research Agency Energy, which was a clone of the Defense Advanced Research and Projects Agency at the Defense Department. And a lot of the improvements in battery density and range that we're now getting came from that early work. So we're now committed to carbon neutrality by 2040. I'm sure we'll get there with our pickup and delivery fleets. We're buying enormous numbers of electric PUD vehicles, which are economic in their own right, unlike passenger vehicles. They have an ROI. I think you're headed to carbon neutrality and over-the-road vehicles. We've got about 40,000 of those. Maybe batteries. Tesla has the Semi. It can't really compete with diesel yet, but there's some trends that make you optimistic. And there are fuel cells, and hydrogen, which I think may be particularly useful for big trucks. When it comes to aviation, it's very hard to become carbon neutral in aviation. And so I knew from my days at Yale, we had the best forestry school in the world, which evolved into the Yale School of the Environment. Most of the real environmental talent around the world that's involved in this space are Yale forestry or Yale environmental studies alumni. So I went to Yale and talked to President Salovey and various people did you think that you could combine these disciplines in Yale, study of geology, of course, our Nobel laureate on carbon taxation, which we've supported for years, put all these things together, and could we try to come up with a solution that mitigated all of the emissions from all aviation in the world? Sea shipping would be good too, and but I took it as our remit to move this along. And so Yale came back after looking just about a year and a half, Dean Ingrid Burke, that they thought they could solve this problem. So we gave Yale $100 million and helped raise another $20 million so far from Boeing and Southwest. And I think there's some real promise of mitigating 4 or 5% of all carbon emissions, which is what aviation does at max. It's really probably closer to 3.5%, but then you put military on top of that. So they're doing great work. We go review their progress every 6 months. And I won't take the time at the moment, but everybody at Yale knows how to get on the Yale website, go to the Yale Center for Natural Carbon Capture and look at the work. It's quite exciting.
Oh, it's wonderful that you and the company have given back to Yale, and and it's an amazing story, and something that I just remember the forestry students having the best hats at graduation with all the trees in their heads. But that's very exciting.
Yeah.
My last question before we turn over to the Q&A is on the arts, and I don't think most people know about your involvement.
Yeah.
In the film business, and I would love just a quick few anecdotes from Alcon, Black Label Media, and Devotion on what you've been doing to give back to the arts.
Well, some years ago, we had a director at FedEx who was friends with a noted movie producer. I invested in a film. I met these two young lads that went to Princeton together and worked for this producer. They came to me with, at the time, a very novel and iconoclastic idea to sell the foreign distribution rights to film, thereby paying for most of the budget of a film and having relatively small equity in it. And so you could go to bat over and over again. It's very similar to the venture capital business, because in creative film, you never know what's going to find an audience and what isn't. So I backed these two young men, and they established a company called Alcon Entertainment. One of my daughters went to NYU, the Tisch School, studied film, worked for Alcon, and then set up her own company 15 years later called Black Label Media. So I'm involved with two film companies. Alcon's made a lot of films that you would know. Molly shepherded through Alcon, The Blind Side. That's the highest grossing sports movie of all time. I was amused to see it was the #1 title on Netflix of all times the other day. They did all kinds of other films like Book of Eli and Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants and P.S. I Love You. Then Molly, on her side of the house, since she established Black Label Media, she did Sicario, Soldado, Only the Brave, 12 Strong, La La Land. She was an executive producer on. I should have mentioned in Alcon, we did Blade Runner 2049, and now that's going to be a big streaming series on Amazon. So I've been in the film business. I'm the biggest movie mogul nobody ever heard of, but it's been enjoyable, and we've done okay with it. It's a tough business. It's of course changed dramatically from feature films and the business model that Andrew Kosov and Broderick Johnson brought to me. To today, where it's basically a business that is dominated by the big streamers. So they pivoted. Molly's in the process of making Sicario 3, and this last winter she had 2 films, one of which was I Want to Dance with Somebody, which was a Whitney Houston biopic. It's terrific. And then we did an unusual movie called Devotion, which I funded and gave the film to the Marine Corps Scholarship Foundation. That's sort of my thank you to the Marine Corps, I guess, or my payment. And it's about 2 remarkable men. It's a best-selling book by Adam Makos. Jesse Brown was the first African-American naval aviator. There weren't any during World War II. He was determined to get his wings and went through incredible prejudice and got them, and was saving the Marines, close to my heart, at the Chosun Reservoir battle, frozen Chosun, which was the 1st Marine Division in which I served. And his wingman, Tom Hudner, right up the road from you, outside of Boston, was a well-to-do guy and went to the Naval Academy. And they came together in the Korean War, and it's quite a poignant story. Tom Hudner is played by Glenn Powell. If you've seen Top Gun Maverick, you know Glenn. He was Hangman. And Jonathan Majors went to Yale Drama, by the way, plays Jesse Brown. So anybody on this webcast, I would urge you to watch Devotion. The aviation sequences are fantastic. They were done by the same people who did Top Gun Maverick with real airplanes, except of course they're vintage airplanes. So that's my movie career.
Fantastic. Well, Fred, thank you so much. I'm going to bring Wendy, you're already here, which is great. Yep. Let's open it up to some Q&A.
Sure, absolutely. So you guys, please bear with me. A ton of great questions came in, and we won't be able to deal with all of them. I'm going to bundle a few together and see what we can accomplish in 10 minutes. Okay, so here we go. So Fred, a few questions came in about different types of AI and the opportunities that the FedEx is seeing with using these particular types of AI. Mm-hmm. One is generative AI. Yes. What opportunities does generative AI present? What about digital twins for optimizing distribution centers? What about network science? And how is FedEx using network science? So as best as you can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, GPT, the generative AI is exactly the type of application I was talking about customs. Because if I order a shirt from London, you don't know to ask, does it have ivory buttons? And if in fact it has ivory buttons and it comes in, the US Customs is going to hold it and it's going to create all kinds of problems. Well, GPT scrapes the internet and asks all those questions for you. You know, oh, you're getting something from London. It's a shirt. Does it have buttons? Yes. Well, you need to ask these questions. So it makes you ask questions and answer things that you never knew to ask. And so that's an example of generative or GPT. On the digital twins, that's an excellent question. We are using digital twins now on virtually all of our operations. And what that allows you to see are things that you just could never perceive before. I mean, we have these enormous hubs. And so you dealt with these flows of these packages or pallets, you know, on sort of an anecdote and audit basis, which is why we invented, by the way, package tracking, so we could keep up with each one of them and not managed by anecdote. But even as late as a few years ago, at the industrial level, you were basically managing by audit and anecdote. But now with digital technologies and being able to put digital twins, you'll see that, oh my goodness, the service problems that we're having out of this place in California, they're because the packages are getting hung up in a chute that needs 3 more degrees of process. So these technologies are allowing you to see things that you couldn't see, to optimize things, which goes into the systems area. So today, for instance, in e-commerce for a lot of our customers, we're so tied in with a lot of our customers. You order some Adidas shoes, or you order some Nike shoes, or you order a piece of equipment. And so what you can do, we will get that information 15, 20 seconds after the order is sent to our retail or our partner. And we'll go back to them and say, you know what, you should look at sending this out of your distribution center in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, because there's a big snowstorm in Denver and this isn't going to get there. And that's exactly, by the way, how we were able to deliver all of those tens of millions of vaccines with such precision. We put a little Bluetooth device on each item that we could watch as it went through the system, and it was integrated with these systems information that would say, okay, this thing is on its way to Sloan Kettering, but there's a big traffic problem going across the East River. So we notify the customers, and we're not going to be there by 10, but we'll be there by 11:30, so they could program the distribution. And some of them were temperature sensitive. So all of these technologies are revolutionizing our world, and I can only imagine what they're doing in many other spaces. But distribution, warehousing, weather mitigation, I'm sure these things are going to be fantastic in agriculture and all kinds of systems. But that's how we're using, and those are some examples.
Okay, thank you. Another question. What do you think of autonomous drone delivery? Will it become essential to cargo delivery, given what we're seeing in AI?
Well, one of my old partners, Art Bass, long since passed on, was a helicopter pilot, a Marine helicopter pilot. And he flew for New York Airways, and people my age will remember one of the great luxuries of life was going off the Pan Am building in one of those New York Airways helicopters to JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark, and getting there in about 10 minutes. And 1977, I think one of the Sikorsky S-61s, the strut broke, it fell over, the blade flew off, cut a person in two on the 5 people in 2 on the roof, and killed a woman 70 some odd floors below. That was the last time a helicopter flew off of the roof of the Pan Am building. So drones are flying objects, and even though they don't have much payload capability, they can kill you or blind you or maim you. So the restrictions that the FAA has on drones in urban areas are quite profound. And all of the optimism about drone delivery in urban areas was quite unrealistic as it came to delivery in heavily populated areas. Now, there's some exceptions to this about delivering medicines and vaccines and so forth in Africa with longer range drones. But I do not think that aerial drones, in terms of delivering individual packages, will be a very big business at all. In fact, we were the first people ever delivered a drone by air with a partner. I think I can't remember the name of the subsidiary of Google up in Virginia. But the physics, you're trying to lift something off the ground that's called gravity, and it burns a lot of fuel to get up there. So I don't think it's going to be the prolific thing that was really thought it would be, beginning with the famous episode with Jeff Bezos and Charlie Rose on TV one time. It was completely unmindful of the regulatory and the safety issues involved with things that are flying in the air.
Thank you. I have one more question. I'm so sorry that we're not going to be able to take all of these amazing questions, but one question that Sam didn't have a chance to ask, and I'm going to steal it, is what advice you would have for the founders in the audience?
To the founders and to everybody on the webcast, the first and most important thing is keep your humility and understand your mortality. I mean, we're all human. Life is short, it ends. Most people today that have never experienced any tragedy and loss get all wrapped up in their own personal self, and that's a very unhealthy thing to do. So I would keep those two things top of mind, that you're not the smartest person in the world, and be humble. I tried to get that across on my approach to management, which is teams and making sure you take care of your folks, and to recognize that clock is ticking. And so you can go back and read your Yale Ozymandias or whatever it is you want, but you keep that mortality in mind. I try to couple that, and this isn't comfortable with a lot of people, but with a little bit of humor. Because life is short, and it is in many ways absurd, and even more so today if you watch what's happening in this country with the crazy politics we have. Be able to laugh at yourself, and business is just arithmetic. It's about money, and you can't take it with you, and it's just a way to keep score and do something productive and have a good time in life and make an impact. But humility, humor, and a sense of the mortality of the human race are the three things I would recommend, not just to founders, but to everybody. And I find them increasingly lacking, which disturbs me a lot about the modern world. And I think part of it is because so much of the modern world is run by people who are focused on the screen, and so what comes out of the screen is reality rather than what is actually going on in the world. So that's my advice for founders and all of the participants on this webcast.
Wonderful. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Fred. So everybody, we're going to need to wrap here because we're at time. Just a few quick announcements as we close down here. First of all, our next event will be our pitch off, our 4th annual pitch off, June 22nd at 5 p.m. Eastern. 5 startups from the Yale community will be competing for prizes of $10,000 and $5,000 respectively, along with valuable pro bono services. Please tune into that. It's going to be sponsored by the Yale Office of Development as well as Yale Ventures. Be there. It's going to be really fun. And then finally, you can always check our LinkedIn page, Accelerate Yale, for updates, as well as the accelerateyale.org website and yaleangels.org. Secondly, and not least, I want to thank Mr. Smith, for joining us today. It was such an honor to have you here. We've been talking about you for a long time, actually. I can't believe you're actually here with us. So thank you so much for spending this hour with the Yale community. We also wanted to thank your team at FedEx for making this as seamless a process as possible, because we know your schedule is so busy. We wanted to thank the Yale Veterans Association for partnering with us on this event, and the Yale Alumni Association Shared Interest Group for making this event possible with all the great publicity that they shared. Thanks to our audience for joining, and a recording of this event will be posted on our Accelerate Yale YouTube channel, so just be on the lookout for that. And I will send out the chat record as an attachment for everybody who attended today. And that's it.
Go Bulldogs.
Yes. Go Bulldogs. Okay.
Thank you so much,
right.
Fred. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you, Fred. All right. Have a great evening, everybody. All right. Bye-bye.